You now tuned in to the Gumptown Podcast. I'm your boy Doug B. We ain't got nothing to talk about, but we got something to talk about. Let's go. Good people, good people, good people. Welcome back to the Gumptown Podcast, episode 134. I'm your boy Doug B. If you tuned in to this podcast, thank you for your time and your attention. I really appreciate you giving this podcast a shot. Today's guest is the founder and owner of Illuminated Expressions, LLC, as well as the host of Goddesses of Social Work podcast. I'm looking forward to this conversation, and I'm sure we'll all be inspired by her story. Let's chop it up with Renita Davis. Renita, how's it going?
It's going well, Doug. Thank you. How's it going for you?
Glad to hear that. All is well on my end, too. First things first, thank you for taking time out of your schedule to speak with me a few minutes. I really appreciate it.
I'm glad you invited me. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Of course, here to talk about all the great things you're doing with Illuminated Expressions LLC, as well as what you got going on with Goddesses of Social Work podcast. But before we talk about those things, let's get to know the woman behind it all. So I know you were telling me that you were born in Arkansas and your father being in the military. Thank him for his service. You got a chance to live the military brat life. What was that like for you?
It was good. It was good. I think that being a military brat, he was in the Air Force for 21 years, and we got to move around a lot. And I still move around. I don't think I know how to catch roots, but I appreciate my dad for his service as well. But we moved around a lot, and it helped me become flexible in different situations and meet different people. And I enjoy being a military brat because I think it gives a unique perspective, an expanded perspective on what it means to live in this big old world.
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely powerful stuff. And to that point, you get a chance to move around into new environments. You learn how to adapt in different situations, which is a great skill as you grow older and get in terms of different environments. So, I mean, of course, it doesn't make sense at the time when you're going through it, but I can only imagine being a military brat and getting a chance to move around and having to pivot and adjust. It's paid great dividends for you later on in your life.
Absolutely. There's this, when you just said that, I thought about when I was in the third grade. It was before the military moved you in the summer, before they would just move you at any time, even within the school year. And when I was in the third grade, we moved. We were in Colorado Springs and we had to move. And I remember my best friend in the third grade had made me this little monkey puppet, and I put it under my pillow so that I wouldn't forget it. And we woke up earlier in the morning, and of course I forgot my little puppet that my friend had made me, and so that was so traumatizing. But yeah, I got to meet lots of people and learned how to just become friends with people wherever I was.
Yes, ma'am. Powerful stuff. Love to hear it. So, of all the places you got a chance to move around when you were a kid, what's what would you say is the most memorable place you got to live at? Most memorable city you got to live in. My apologies.
Yeah, I think Colorado Springs. I remember it snowed a lot, and um it was a unique experience to live there. But that I think that I would say Colorado was my favorite city to live in,
Okay,
or
sounds good.
state.
Okay,
Hmm.
sounds good. And yes, ma'am, I've been out to Colorado Springs once for work, and I'll say this: I was out there in January. That cold is way different than the Alabama cold. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes, it hits different. It definitely hits different. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. So you were telling me that your father ended up stationed at Maxwell here in Montgomery.
Hmm.
That's where you got a chance to come and attend Sydney near high school, graduate
Yeah,
from
go
high school.
poets. Go
Yes, ma'am.
poets. Yeah.
Much respect. Yes, ma'am. You got a chance to hear. So did you experience any cultural shock when you originally moved to Montgomery?
Oh my goodness. Yes. Do you know, I had never heard the derogatory racial slur until I got here. So, yeah, it was definitely a culture shock when we moved to Montgomery, and I don't know if I've gotten over it.
Mm.
A lot of people, when they hear my voice, they don't think that I have lived, except for when I go, obviously now when I travel, people can hear the Southern in me, but I often got teased just for the way I talked, and obviously, being a Black woman and moving here, or Black girl and moving here, I didn't really know uh, what racism was. I can't say now when I go back to Colorado, I'm very aware of it, but as a little one or, a young person coming to Montgomery, Alabama, it was quite a shock. I was thinking about this the other day, Doug. The first thing my dad did when we got here was he went to Popeyes and had red beans and rice because that was not a thing from all the states that we had lived in. I had not heard of red beans and rice, and he was so excited to
Mm.
get red beans and rice at Popeyes. I hadn't thought about that in a while.
Wow, that's amazing. And to your point, I can only imagine that culture shock coming here to Alabama and hearing those slurs. And yeah, that racism is overt in this
Mm.
side of the world. And hats off to your pops for coming here and getting some of them red beans and rice. I tell you one thing, it might be Alabama may have its racism problems, but one thing they don't lack is seasoning that food. The food is amazing here for
They
sure.
have amazing food. Absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
Yes, ma'am. So you finish up high school, graduate from Sidney Lanier High School, and you go on
Hmm.
Auburn University. What was that experience like being up on the plains?
So, again, I loved Auburn and oh my goodness, going to Auburn University, I didn't, let me tell you this, because I wasn't from Montgomery, Alabama or Alabama, period, I didn't realize how, and I know you're going to, transition to University of Alabama, but I didn't realize how big the rivalry was between the University of Alabama and Auburn University. So I'm, at Auburn, all orange and blue, just doing the thing, enjoying it, loving it. Enjoyed the school of social work that I was at, had some amazing professors. And then I went to the University of Alabama and I have all my orange and blue paraphernalia. I mean, literally, I graduated from Auburn. The week I graduated from Auburn, I moved to Tuscaloosa that same week. So there was no time, to, take anything down. Didn't even know I needed to actually.
Mm.
And when I got to University of Alabama, do you know somebody egged my car? I had all that orange and blue, and that talk about a culture shock. Being used to being, at Auburn and then going to Tuscaloosa, that in itself was a culture shock. I think Auburn for me, I don't, that was several years ago, but Auburn for me was more of a family town, and we would go to Mellow Mushroom or whatever the pizza joint was on Toomer's Corner and have a beer or something with your professor. And the University of Alabama was more of a party campus when I got to Tuscaloosa. So that in itself too was a culture shock.
Mm. Wow. And yes, that's one thing I was definitely going to ask you about that when I was doing my due diligence and I looked at your bio. I said Renita is a real deal risk taker. She went from graduating from Auburn to going to Alabama, and now you breaking down not being from here, you didn't understand just how bitter the rivalry is. But I'm pretty sure they soon taught you just how serious this rivalry is between Alabama and Auburn, huh?
That first week, I told you I
Yes,
got
ma'am.
my car egged. And even now, because I've graduated in 98 and 99 from, Auburn and then Alabama, even now with the Iron Bowl, they're like, pick one, pick one. I mean, and I love both schools. I absolutely adored both my experiences at both those universities. And every year people are saying you have to pick one. And so it's so hard, even now, all these years later to pick one, but because I'm a social worker and I love fighting for the underdog, I always go
Mhm.
for Auburn.
Yes, ma'am. No worries. Much respect. And I definitely appreciate you sharing that experience, that culture shock coming to Montgomery and the culture shock going from a family friendly town in Auburn to a party town in T Town. Wow.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. So let's talk about Illuminated Expressions, LLC. Very intriguing name. What inspired it?
You know what? I've been a social worker in Alabama for over 2 decades now, and I got to teach at one of the universities here. And as I was transitioning out of academia, I knew that I didn't want to work for anybody ever again. And so I honestly, the story is I was sitting and I love Habakkuk 2 and 2, write the vision down and make it plain. And so I was sitting at my desk at the university I was working at and was just writing out names for my private practice. And one of my former students, who's now a colleague, he came in. I just asked him, I was like giving him a list of thoughts that I had, and he said illuminated expressions, but it was so perfect because I think the work that I do is to help people illuminate their authentic expression. You know, I show up as my authentic self in the spaces that I get to work in, and I want other people to be able to show up as their authentic self as well. And so I didn't, I was one of the ideas, but actually I'll give it to one of my former students. He actually was like, I like that one the best, but as I've been in practice now for 4 years this year, it's been the perfect name for what I do, is because I really want folks to be able to have a safe space to show up as their authentic self and illuminate their authentic expression.
That's powerful. That's a great story, very organic way. How you came up with the name. Love to hear those type of stories. Like you said, a former student of yours put the name out there, you liked it, and you rolled with it, and now you rocking and rolling with the business. Love to hear it.
Hmm.
Yes, ma'am. So, what services do you offer with Eliminated Expressions?
So I'm a licensed clinical, well, I'll say this, I'm a licensed independent clinical social worker that's LICSW in Alabama, and I'm in private practice. And so when people think of private practice, they often think of therapy. And I am a psychotherapist. I do offer therapy services for some folks here in Alabama, but mostly, and why I went into private practice is not necessarily for the therapeutic sector, but I am a board approved clinical social work supervisor for social workers who have their LMSW and want to move into the clinical arena. So I have about, on rotation, about 30 social workers who are LMSWs here all across the great state of Alabama who are working towards clinical licensure, and they stay with me for a couple years. So it's almost like going back to grad school. They have to see me at least 4 hours a week, and I have several groups throughout the month that they're able to come to, and I get them to the finish line to get their clinical license. So I do offer therapy or psychotherapeutic services, but mostly my practice is social work clinical supervision.
Wow, that's amazing stuff you have going on with the business. What exactly inspired you to want to come into the social work space?
Oh, what inspired me to come into the social work space? Well, I'll tell you, I was at AUM after I graduated from Lanier. I went to AUM and Doug, I changed my major 5 times. That's when you could. I've worked in academics since, and I know they don't let you do that as much anymore, but I changed my major 5 times. I was a journalism major, I was an English major, I was a speech pathology major. And my final major that I changed to was sociology. And I remember, and I'm so glad I'm going to get the opportunity to say it publicly, Dr. Ann Marcus, she was at AUM. I don't know where she is now, but she pulled me out of an anthropology class that I was sitting in. And she said, what are you going to do with your degree when you graduate? And I was going through some personal things at the time, but I was feeling kind of angry. And I remember looking at her like, what do you mean what I'm going to do with it? You're supposed to tell me what I'm supposed to do with it. And I was literally 5 semester hours from graduating with a sociology degree. And she said, well, I think that you would make an amazing social worker. And I did not know what a social worker was. I did learn quickly for another reason what a social worker was. But in that same kind of month that she had mentioned something else personal had happened, and I did have the best social worker dealing with a situation going on in our personal life. And I remember her saying, I think you would make a good social worker. And I didn't know what it was. But then once I had an experience with a social worker, I said, if I ever become a social worker, I'm going to make sure that everybody's story is important and heard and seen because I didn't feel that way at the time. And so that's when I went on and went to Auburn and loved, sat in my first social work 101 class. And after having changed my major 5 times, I felt like I was at home. I was like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And so some people have plan Bs, like they have, some type of trade or whatever, but all I know is social work. This is all I've ever done. I've got my BSW from Auburn, and then I went on and got my MSW, worked in the field, got the licenses that you need, and got the highest license in the state. And now I'm trying to pass on my love for social work to other people who decided to join the profession as well.
Wow, that's amazing, Renita. I appreciate you for sharing that. And going back to you changing your majors 5 times, I'm sure you've been a military brat and knowing how to pivot and adapt. It was no big deal. I'm not surprised you were able to change your majors 5 times and land on your feet just based on where you come from. It's amazing how you go through, it's amazing how you don't, it's amazing how you obtain skills and you go through chapters of your life not knowing that learning how to adapt when you were coming up as a kid like I said, it paid off in the end because you were able to change a major 5 times. And wow, talking about having the ability to pivot, that's amazing.
And can I say, Doug, I think even within the profession of social work that I've been able to do, that I've not stayed with one population more than 3, 4, 5 years. So, I work with children, youth, and families. I've done hospice. I work with substance abuse. I've done grant writing and policy on the macro level. And I continue to pivot even within the profession. I have not done just one thing in social work. And I think that's what makes it such a great profession.
Yes, ma'am. That's great. And I thank you for sharing that as well. You just exploring different, like you said, different realm, different community, social work, not boxing yourself in. And that's great. Like that's amazing that you've been able to do that. And even just how you got into social work is powerful. Just
Mm,
going through with a social worker and not wanting anyone else to feel like that. To me, it sounds like you turned that pain to your purpose.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Damn, that's amazing. So that transitions right into my next portion. Whenever I have entrepreneurs, creators on the platform like yourself, I like to talk about 3 things: the aha moment, action, and audacity. I know you were saying
Mm.
your aha moment came while you were working in academia and realizing that you wanted to make that transition out of academia. So that goes right into the action portion. How long after your initial aha moment did it take you to step out of academia and start working for
What a great question, Doug. I love that question so much. So, like I said, I believe in Habakkuk 2, 2, and 3. Write the vision down and make it plain. So, I had already, while still working there, started thinking about it. So, I didn't just leave and like, oh, okay, then I'm gonna, open my practice. I started writing it down, starting obviously with some of the names and doing research. But, I took about 6 months really, I went on Psychology Today and created my profile to get some of my therapy clients. But also the reason I went into supervision, Doug, and because I knew I didn't want to work for anyone else. And so I thought it was going to be the traditional private practice. But actually, two of my former students came to me and asked me when was I going to start a supervision group. I had provided supervision in the agencies that I worked for as a clinical social worker, but I've not provided supervision separately as my own, business. And so I remember one of the former students who asked me, when was I going to start a supervision group? I said, well, I don't have a flyer. And she said, well, I'll make you a flyer. I don't know why that was my response,
it?
but that was the only thing holding me up. She said, well, I'll make you a flyer because I knew if I couldn't just do it with two people, I needed obviously um, a larger group. And I really still, even in that moment, thought that my private practice was going to be traditional therapy. So it was step by step, a little bit at a time. And within the 6 months when I knew I was leaving in May, by June, I had a full private practice. And so I knew around Christmas time, we have that Christmas holiday break that this was going to be my last semester in academics. And in that 6 months, I just kind of started doing the work, creating the email, creating the website. But then even within that 6 months, what I thought I was going to do, which was the psychotherapy pivot to supervision. And now, like I said, it started with two women, but now I have on rotation over 30 beautiful social workers that I have the honor of supervising every month.
Wow, what a story. And that's great that you didn't take a whole lot of time. Like you said, you had already been planning this out. You had wrote the vision and made it plain, which is always great. So you already had a plan, and that's great that you followed through and you asked for help, like you said, with the flyer. And it's so amazing hearing you talk about that, Renee. A lot of us, myself included, we have a hard time mentioning what we're working on sometimes or even asking for help. So kudos to you for asking for help and having someone that was willing to do that for you. That last portion, audacity, it's one thing to have an idea, it's another thing to act on the that last portion, audacity, Renita, that is what makes it all run. It takes courage, audacity to take an idea, put action behind it, and put it out to the world to be praised or criticized. Who or what gave you that courage, that audacity to put illuminated expressions?
I think I think the desperateness of not want to work for anybody else ever again. I had built so many programs for so many other people, and did it well, right? And I just felt like I knew I could do it. I had experience in doing it, and I think it was just the desperateness of not wanting to have to go back to the traditional 9 to 5. But I think, Doug, and I don't know if you were going to ask this question or not, but I I think I'm still having to be audacious, right? And bold, because even as I told you, as having that foundation of being a military brat, having had illuminated expressions, now for 4 years, I'm like, okay, now what's next, right? And so one of the things last year that I started was the Goddesses of Social Work podcast. I call us our community, our social work community, are the Goddesses of Social Work. And um, for me, it wasn't being audacious or bold to start Illuminate Expressions. I know you're absolutely right. It does take courage and it takes a lot of faith to depend solely on your own income. Never was anything that I thought I would be doing in my career. But I think for me, the more audacious thing has been starting that podcast and putting it out to the world. Because for me, the therapy, I'm good at that, and the supervision, folks are looking for me. They know me. They know me as an instructor. They know my work as a social worker in the community. But then continuing to do new things in this entrepreneurial world, I think is where the audaciousness comes in, right? Being bold and putting your work out there is scary. It really is very scary. And even still, I think I don't do that as boldly as I know I could and can. Um, but just getting back to your question, I think it was just not wanting to go backwards and doing what I've been doing and knew that it wasn't working for my energy or my soul made me have to be bold.
Hmm. That's powerful stuff. And that's great that you gave yourself the audacity because you identified what you did not want to do. And it's interesting because we often think what we desire most is what's going to drive us towards a thing, but sometimes what we don't want drives us towards a certain thing. So that's
Mhm.
amazing that you were able to take that and identify that you did not want to work for other people, wanted to bet on yourself because you had the experience work you could use the product. So that's amazing that you were willing to step away from the 9 to 5 world and work for yourself, which leads right perfectly into my next question. So what was that transition like coming out of the 9 to 5 infrastructure into working for yourself?
It's a lot of hard work, but you know what? I was working hard anyway.
Right.
You know, I was working hard with the universe. I was working probably 60, 70, 80 hours anyway. And so doing my own thing, it's been hard work. And still 4 years later, it's still hard work. We talked beforehand. I was on a webinar. I'm constantly trying to learn and teach myself. If I don't know how to do something, I'm going to the webinars, I'm signing up for the classes. Besides already doing the day-to-day stuff, I'm still trying to make sure that I'm teaching myself and signing up for classes and doing the work so that I can just continuously get better. But if you're not afraid of working and if you're already working hard, I love that you said bet on yourself. Just bet on yourself because it is a lot of hard work, but you're not afraid of hard work anyway because you're doing it. You're already doing hard work. So work hard for yourself.
That's amazing. I'm glad you touched on that. And I'm sure someone out there listening needs to hear that, myself included, because it's always that wondering what's going to happen whenever I do decide to make that transition. Because I still work a 9 to 5 and I'm still figuring out some entrepreneurial endeavors I will embark on. So just hearing you talk about that, it makes sense. And I'm not encouraging anyone who's listening, or I'm not even encouraging myself to make any radical decisions, but it's just great to think about it from that perspective because you're working 40 hours a week, one else. And granted, you can work there for 25, 30 years, but at some point in time, you're going to have to retire. And then 9 times out of 10, they're not going to pay you what they were paying you while you were working for them. And that's great that you will take that leap and step out. So let's talk about this transition from a perspective of, in terms of planning it out. Did you have a set number that you wanted to save up before you made the move? And if so, did you accomplish that goal before you made the move? Like, just kind of take us through that planning process of transitioning out of 9 to 5, that security blanket, into working for yourself. What was the planning like?
A couple of different things. I think I got a little lucky because I did get a payout from the university I was working at. So I did have a little bit of a cushion, but I think for me, it was mostly I was doing both at the same time. So once I was able, I was, obviously still teaching, but then I was also working in the private practice in the week on weekends and in the evening. And once I was able to see that, the private practice was going to give me more, at least the same or more that I was getting at the university. I was able to, feel okay. I was leaving anyway. I can't, so it wasn't, I don't think I had a choice. I was leaving anyway, but it felt good to know that by June, I was making the same amount that I was making at the university setting, right, on a monthly basis. Um, and so to me, it was a simultaneous kind of thing. I can't say I never necessarily had things saved up. I just was able to see, oh, okay, I'm bringing in this amount of money, which was what I was making at the university, and I'm maintaining it. I'm not. I'm going to say there are some months that are feast or famine. Not in the beginning, it was feast or famine. So there would be, especially in the therapy world, when it gets hot outside, folk don't want to come to therapy. They're on vacation. Even my supervision folk, we do better now. They're more obviously more consistent. But in the beginning, you had to set some boundaries down. Like, I am in New Orleans all the time. I totally get it. I want to take vacation. But I think also I hope I do model a good work-life balance where if are holidays, I don't schedule sessions during those weekends and or weeks, right? And I encourage them, if their babies are sick or if they have something, we work around it. But they in the beginning, that I would say the first year, maybe year and a half, 2 years, I had to see what the patterns of service were. So, for instance, during October, November, especially in the wintertime, because of SAD, which is seasonal affective disorder, everybody was coming to therapy. So, that's your harvest time. Harvest it up and save it, put it up, pay the bills, whatever you need to. And then realize that maybe, especially here in Alabama, when it gets May, June, July, folks aren't going to show up as much, right? But then for me too, I just didn't solely rely on Alabama as a clinician. I'm able to be licensed in multiple states. And so I'm licensed in a lot of different states with different time zones. So some of the patterns I was seeing in Alabama may not affect, maybe who clients that I'm seeing in Idaho, right? So that summertime doesn't get there truly until June, and they're not as anxious to get outside like some of my Montgomery folks are. So diversifying even how I was practicing helped me a lot. And so I think for me, and I know for my, especially for my folks who love to plan, I didn't plan it as well as I think I would encourage somebody to do. It was for me I learned as I went kind of deal. And I realized there were some months that were going to be way busier and I was going to just do what I needed to do during those months. And then there was going to be some months that it was slower. But then in what spaces could I create some boundaries that I did have some consistency? And then I put those practices in place as well.
Wow, that's amazing. I appreciate you for sharing that. and even just having the awareness that coming into this space that some months are going to be great, some months are going to be interesting, and like you had that self awareness and understanding what you had in line, the payout that you were that you were set up to get on the five situation, and that's great. And even the part that you mentioned about learned as you went, and you wouldn't advise anyone else to go that path. Like I appreciate you for sharing that, and that's great that you were willing to not necessarily have everything planned out perfectly, that you just went, you knew it was time for you to make that transition. And great, that's a great way to make moves sometimes because if we sit around and we wait for every condition to be perfect, a lot of times you're gonna make a move because there's always gonna be something, Renita. That's all I'm trying to get to. And you were able to make it
Hmm.
happen regardless of whatever was going on. Like life will continue to life no matter what. Your conditions won't be perfect. And salute to you for making that move.
And Doug, can I also say, I think too, we think we have to make a certain amount. And one of the things I learned is we can live off a lot less.
Right.
We actually can live off a lot less than, but I think it's okay too to live off a little less, knowing that you're going to eventually make a lot more if you're willing to do that as well.
Right, absolutely. And that just goes back to that awareness that I was speaking of a few seconds ago, just in terms of your awareness. That's spot on. We can live off a lot less. And if a lot of us would be bold enough to print off our bank statement and see where we waste a lot of money at, yeah, we would realize, yeah, I don't have to go to Chipotle 5 times a week. I can
Hmm.
cook at the house. So
I
that's
used to love Starbucks, but you know what? I love Sam's Starbucks coffee
a
now.
Yes, ma'am. Hey, I'm right there with you. Hey, I have my Keurig and my K cups, and hey,
Hmm.
it tastes just like
That
Starbucks.
good for me. Exactly. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. So that transitioned perfectly into the next segment, your other business venture that you're working on, the Goddesses of Social Work podcast. What inspired you to come into this podcasting space?
You know what? I'm so glad we're talking about that because it's my new favorite thing. It is my new favorite thing. I'm gonna say that my sister, she also is an entrepreneur, Dr. Kendra Ray. She is in Brooklyn, New York, but she had an NIH boot camp that she was going to, and her mentor mentioned doing a podcast, and I was her first guest. And but because she and I do so many great things together, she kind of walked me through how she did it, and I was like, oh, and I loved, and when she sent me the link. I loved it. I was like, oh, Renita, you got some wisdom. And so I don't know what happened. It was just I woke up, again, I probably like I started Illuminated Expressions like, okay, this just feels like something I want to do. And I decided to ask five of the social workers that I'm in community with if they would be willing to be interviewed. And I found out later that it's hard to say no to me. I love it. So even though they were scared to come out of their comfort zone, they said yes. And so, but Doug, I didn't know anything about podcasting. My sister had walked me through the platforming, but then I was like, okay, I recorded these episodes, and so I was really blessed. My brother is a computer tech, and he walked me through how to edit, and then I realized I just enjoyed doing the editing myself. And after the first five episodes were released, people started reaching out to me, asking if they could come on. And I was like, yeah. So I didn't know what it was going to be. Again, here's me not planning, just like, oh, Renita, let's do something. And so other folks started asking me, and because I did have that university background, I have friends in academia who were like, "Oh man, we're going to share this podcast with our students. Their 101 student social work 101 classes and some of their other classes." And so then other people started suggesting folks that they thought would be good for the podcast. And so it's kind of just turned into this beautiful thing of its own. And because I love learning about people's stories, as a social worker, that's what I do all day, every day is listen to people's stories. But I have loved listening to the stories of social workers. And then because I know I do think there needs be some changes within our profession. And the powers that be have always been the powers that be. It just feels like a platform to get the stories of people that aren't often listened to or invited to some of the conferences, right? Um, or some of the speaking engagements, but we're getting their stories out. So it has a couple of purposes. One, because I do love social work community and realize how important social work community was, especially as a private solo practitioner. I kind of started feeling a little isolated working at home by myself and not really interacting with social workers. I wanted to be a part of social work community. And so create, if you want to do something, you just create it, right? So the social work community, the social work goddesses. Doug, sorry.
No worries.
The Goddesses of Social Work podcast is a community, right? So people who feel a little isolated in their social work practice are able to listen to the episodes that come out almost every week and feel like they too are part of the community. But also, I hope that it's creating change so that folks don't feel like they have to do social work right out of the textbook, but that it's important that we're listening to the people that we're serving, the cultures that we're serving, that it doesn't look like sometimes this westernized way of doing this work, but we are able to see that other social workers are doing it the way that we're doing it, right? Versus how the textbooks say that we should be doing it. And so, giving people permission slips, I think, is what I hope the Goddesses of Social Work podcast is do. And it's like, oh, she's saying that to her clients. I do that as well. Or she's using music in with her work with her clients. I want to be able to do that as well. I color with my clients. I use some other modalities as well with my clients, and being able to talk to other folks about that in a public way, I hope is creating change within the social work.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Just the background of the Goddesses of Social Work podcast. But the thing that stood out to me, and of course, we'll talk more about the podcast here shortly, just hearing how you had that idea and you acted on it, and how your sister and your brother, they helped you come into this space, even though you came into this space not really understanding how it all worked. You had a great village around you that was willing to help you. And it's just so powerful. We always hear it takes a village, but in the context of when you're a child, it takes a village in all areas of our life, Renita. And I'm pretty sure can agree to that just based on your story. That's amazing.
Absolutely. I want to also then shout out my son.
Okay.
Yes, because I still, even though I know how to edit, right? I
Mhm.
still am not very tech savvy. I have a post that says, I heart technology because I'm changing that language. But even my son, he helps me with some of the video shorts that I do on the podcast as well. So my sister, my brother, my son, they've been a big part of how the Guys is a Social Work podcast has become so successful, but also just the guests and their willingness to come on the show has been a blessing because people don't have to come on, right? Could just have had
Right.
those first five, and that would have been the end of it. But not only the folks who reach out to me to be on it, but then when I see a social worker do an interesting things, not one social worker I've asked to come on, even when I think they're a superstar, because I think some social workers are just superstars. Even when I think they're a social work superstar, every single person I've asked to come on has come on. And I just am grateful for their willingness.
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. I definitely understand that just in terms of reaching out to potential guests. And to your point, people don't have to come on your platform. And I'm always appreciative of those as well as you for coming on my platform and being willing to share your story as you have done today, as well as what you're doing with the Goddesses of Social Work podcast, and just being willing to step into that podcasting lane and talk about that, and allowing other social workers to come on and share their story. I think that's so amazing. I see you're up to episode
Mm.
36. Congratulations, rocking and rolling.
Yeah, yeah. I think we're gonna get to 40 this week because they're already done. I just need they launch on Wednesday. So I was thinking about that today. I think we're at our 40th episode this week, and that's just been but and still have scheduled all the way through June. So
Crazy.
it's a thing for sure. And we've had thousands of downloads, and I just feel so honored, to be able to listen and share the stories of these amazing social workers. Social workers sometimes, in the media and society get a bad rap because they think that all we do is take people's children. I've never taken anybody's baby. I've never worked at DHR. And so there's so many things that and the work that I want to say that too, the work that folks at DHR are doing is important work, but it's not all that social workers do, right? And I feel like who is telling our stories. And so I feel like so honored to be able to share the stories of these amazing social workers because the work they're doing, the work I'm doing, it's needed. We are the healers of this world. We are the ones who hold space for folks who don't have anyone else to hold space for them. And so I wanted to share their stories, and I'm just so honored that I get to do it.
Yes, ma'am, and that's amazing. I just want to again just give you your flowers and commend you for starting the podcast and stay consistent because I read somewhere recently where most podcasters they quit after their first three episodes, and
Mhm.
you're up to 35, and you're saying you're approaching 40 this week, and all the way up until June. And that's great that you've been willing to show up and be consistent with the podcast because the social workers that you bring on the podcast, they do have a story to tell, and whether they realize it or not. And I'm pretty sure you've made them realize that like the world wants to hear your story because your
Mhm.
story may impact one person, but if you impact one person, I believe that's a great ROI that you want your earth to and you change one person's life, one person's perspective by sharing your stories. Amazing work with the podcast, Renita.
Thank you. Doug, can I say you said my favorite word,
Um,
consistent. Consistency, I think, is what has helped Illuminated Expressions be successful. Consistency is what I think is going to make sure the Goddess is a Social Work podcast is successful. If you're not showing up on a consistent basis, you know
exactly.
what I mean? So, if you don't do any other word for when you step into this entrepreneurial lane, whether it's, doing your own practice or organization or whatever it is, or even your podcast, make sure you have the word consistent written down somewhere because consistency is truly the major key. If you're not consistent and people can't rely on you to show up when you say you're going to show up, then yeah, you might as well just stay where you are.
Yes, ma'am. And what you just said is spot on, and I agree 100%. And that was one of the things that when I started the Gumtown podcast in September 2021, that's one thing I set in my mind. I was like, I will show up every week. I will drop a new
Hmm.
episode every. I'm not worried about this episode got one view, this episode got
Yeah,
two views, because the thing about it, Renita, the thing that keeps me showing up is I'm always anticipating the next one will be the one that turns
that's
into a
it.
household name. So
That's it. Hmm.
yes, ma'am. Just that anticipation, that expectation. It's like when we were kids waking up on Christmas morning, we had that anticipation and expectation that we were gonna get those gifts and that it was gonna be a great day. That's how I approach the podcast. I'm like, man, this gonna be the one. This gonna be the conversation that takes me from where I am to where I desire to be. And I'm pretty sure you have those same aspirations for your podcast to become a household name. Why not?
Oh, I know it's going to be. It
Yes,
already is,
ma'am.
Doug. It already is.
Yes, ma'am. Speak it. Speak it as if it is.
Yes.
Talk that
Habakkuk
talk.
2, 2, and 3. Write the vision down and make it plain. I have how many followers I want. I have how many sponsorships that I'm going to have. I have all of those things already written down, right? It already is a household name because it's done.
Talk that talk, Renita. Let them know out there. Let them know. Yes, ma'am. That's powerful stuff. So that's great, great stuff. So you've done great things. You're doing great things with Illuminated Expressions LLC as well as Goddesses Social Work Podcast. So that leads right into my next portion. Vision. What are some of your short term and long term goals for both the business as well as the podcast that you feel comfortable sharing?
Right. So with the limited expression, again, I'm not, it's even though I do therapy services, it's really a supervision practice. And so, I'm licensed in 6 states right now. And one of the states I'm licensed in is Louisiana. So I am a board approved clinical supervisor also in Louisiana. And I have a handful, not like my Alabama supervisees, but a handful of supervisees in Louisiana, and so I want to blow that state up with supervision. I think it's important to have quality supervision, and so going and as I'm licensed in these multiple states, part of the reasons I got licensed in these states was to become a board approved clinical supervisor for the states that I'm licensed in. So I guess expanding the supervision practice is a goal for me for Illuminated Expressions. Also, just transparent. With my therapeutic services, I started the therapeutic services. I started the therapeutic services because I knew what worked for me. So again, going with some of the traditional therapeutic products that we service, like CBT, DBT. I know, we may not know the acronyms, but those traditional modalities don't often work for clients who look like me. And so being able to step into and be brave enough to use the modalities that are working for our clients that our ancestors used, like energy work and things of that nature. So expanding into that arena is one of my goals, and I'm already doing that. And then for the Gods and Social Work podcast, you know, it's international. I don't every every month it's a different theme that we're working in, and we have Social Work Month coming up. Well, it will be in March is Social Work Month, and celebrating Social Work Month, and then just continue to tell the stories, getting the sponsorships that we talked about, and um, being on an international level because we already are actually. We have listeners. One of my social worker, she said that her, oh gosh, I can't remember, but it was in Africa. Her in-laws were listening to the podcast, and I have some listeners in Belize and Switzerland and Canada. So we actually already are international, but doing that on a bigger scale as well. So those are my visions. I don't think they're all that long term. I think they're happening now. I just want to continue to see the numbers grow.
Yes, ma'am. Those are great short term and long term goals for both the business and the podcast. And as you said, it's already done. So I know everything that you spoke about is coming to fruition as we speak. Yes, ma'am. As we wrap up the podcast, Renita, I want to ask $1 million question. I started this podcast to highlight the greatness connected to Montgomery, whether you were born here or lived here for life, be it military, work, or college. You being in Montgomery by way of father locating here, relocating here for military and currently service in the area. I want to ask you, Renita, what do you appreciate the most about the city of Montgomery?
Doug, you broke up just a little bit. I didn't hear that last part.
Yes, ma'am, no worry. So yeah, I'm just saying, just in terms of you coming to Montgomery by way of your father's military career, bringing you here to Maxwell, graduating still near high school, and now you're servicing the area with your business. I just wanted to ask you, what do you appreciate the most about the city of
Hmm.
Montgomery?
I appreciate the support, right? I do. I'm often all over. People sometimes don't know where I am. But every time I come back, hands down, folks just support me. Whatever work I say that I want to do, folks show up for me. They really do. I appreciate the support. I also appreciate the history here, I love being able to go to the Legacy Center and Rosa Parks Museum and just because one of the things my sister, she's in New York, I've said that, but one of the things that is so curious to me because when I go visit her, I am such a tourist, right? I love going to Statue of Liberty. I love going to the Empire State Building. But folks who live in New York don't go and do any of those things, right? And I'm often just so curious about that. And so when in Montgomery, I do the things that they offer, because folks are literally, because I travel so much, they are traveling here to go to the MLK Center to see all the places that we have here in Montgomery. And so I appreciate that we have such a beautiful, hard history that folks, travel hundreds of miles to come to learn more about. And so I want to make sure that when I'm in Montgomery, I'm learning about our history. And so not just the support, but the history that this beautiful city, I think Alabama is absolutely beautiful. It's called Alabama the Beautiful for a reason because it really is beautiful. We have a lot of work to do. I think that's one of the reasons I love being a social worker, and it's going to take, all of us pitching in, but this is such a beautiful space. And so I love the beauty as well.
Yes, ma'am. Powerful stuff. So how can the people connect with you, Renita? What are your social media handles and website?
So I that one. Wasn't ready for that one.
No
Um,
worries.
so I am on Facebook as Illuminated Expressions. I'm on Instagram as Illuminated Expressions. Obviously, the website is illuminatedexpressionsllc.com. Also on Instagram and TikTok, Goddesses of Social Work podcast is the social media handles there. And you can always email me at illuminatedexpressionsllc@gmail.com.
Okay, too easy. And of course, I'll put all that information in the description of the episode. Hey, Renita, thanks again for the conversation. I really appreciate you.
Thank you, Doug. It was great.
Yes, ma'am. Good people, that concludes another dope episode of the Gumtown Podcast. In the meantime, in between time, y'all know what to do. Be blessed, be safe, but most importantly, have the audacity to be you. Gone. Thanks again for tuning in. I appreciate your time and your attention. Until next time.